what your thoughts are about this unfolding story. Of course, we have to say, yet again, reiterate that Russell Brand denies every single one of these allegations. But we had one of the lead investigative reporters on The Times in the studio at the beginning of the show this afternoon, and he talked about the rumours that were being concurrently investigated by The Times, the Sunday Times and Channel 4. In the end, once they all found out what each other was doing, they decided to pool resources and do one investigation. But it doesn't seem like a concerted attempt by the media to take him down, much more, according to The Times, that they couldn't ignore the story any longer.
Yeah, I think it's really important to also look at the society in which Russell Brand, the accusations against Russell Brand have come to light. You've got to look at the fact that almost every other week we have a police officer accused of sexual crimes. There's currently 56 MPs under investigation for sexual crimes. Even the head of state, the King, is trying to rehabilitate the image of his brother, who again accused of sexual crimes. And I think we live in a society where the possibility of a man's life being ruined is more important, or seen as more important, than the reality of a woman's life being ruined by sexual crimes. And men's testimony is routinely believed when women's isn't, and that's a real problem. And I think it's really interesting that he established himself on kind of independent media. That's a place where you're not subject to scrutiny. That's a place where you can control the narrative. And it's also quite interesting that that came about around the time that the Times started this investigation around 4 years ago. If there was someone that was quite, trying to maybe get around this, then they would probably move into the wellness area, which is usually rife with, unfortunately, nowadays, conspiracy theories. And unfortunately, with the footballification of politics also, there's all the kind of culture war aspect, which kind of has undermined truth. And that's a real problem. But when you look at the culture that I talked about earlier, it's so easy for somebody that might want to perpetrate this type of crime to, get away with it. And it's also going to really discourage women from wanting to speak out about it too.
On the other hand, this is the culture, Tan, in which these women have finally been persuaded to speak. This is the culture in which people will say they're absolutely horrified at the idea of the sorts of things that used to be allowed, the sorts of things that particularly stars, but Professor Jonathan Shallis, who joined me on the show before the break, was adamant and also quite accurate in saying it's not just showbiz. These sorts of things went on in, the racing world, in advertising, in banking, in medicine. We only heard the other day, didn't we? Female surgeons talk about being assaulted by male colleagues in the operating theatre. I had two of them on the show just the other day. So it's not just showbiz, but isn't this a culture now, right now in 2023, where following #MeToo and following the Weinstein revelations, the climate and the culture has changed? And this is why women can now feel, let's hope they can anyway, feel more confident to come out and say, this is what happened to me. This is how I was used by the workplace to be a pawn between the management and the star, who, would only be willful and couldn't be governed by management. And therefore they used me as a kind of sexual, kind of alluring kind of bait to get him to do what they wanted him to do. I was used that way. Isn't the climate change, and therefore people can now say that? Women can now say that.
I don't think it is, unfortunately. I've seen a lot of the pushback and it has been grotesque. And a lot of it is linked, I think, to the kind of conspiracy era and also the kind of post-truth era that was created around Brexit and around COVID, where people will just blindly follow people that say things that they believe. And also, you've got to think about the woman that kind of drafted this report. She was talking about how nowadays women feel more safe to, unfortunately, talk to journalists than they do the police, because people say, why don't you report it? Well, women don't trust the police, unfortunately. Like when every other day you hear of an officer being, charged with rape, when the Met sat on one of the most prolific rapists that Britain's ever known, how are women going to feel? Like, how are they going to feel safe enough to approach that institution? Unfortunately, misogyny, as you were touching upon, is a rot in every institution.